Hey everyone, it's Bob. Welcome back to Elevate Your AIQ. Today I'm joined by Scott Stephenson, CEO and co-founder of Deepgram AI, a voice AI platform helping businesses unlock the power of speech through real-time audio intelligence. From building dark matter detectors 2 miles underground to pioneering end-to-end deep learning for audio, Scott's journey is anything but ordinary. We dive into how Deepgram came to life, why voice is the next frontier in human-computer interaction, what the future of AI-powered communication means for industries like talent acquisition, customer service, and far beyond. I learned a lot in my chat with Scott, and I know you'll find it insightful as well. Thanks as always for tuning in. Glad you're here. Let's go talk to Scott. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver. With me today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Scott Stephenson, who is the CEO and co-founder of Deepgram AI. How you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Really looking forward to digging into this conversation. Really just overwhelmed by, some of the stories I've heard about your background and some of the experiments you've done as a researcher and your physics background and things like that. So, but before I go too far with your introduction, I thought I'd just let you take the reins and tell everyone a little bit about your background and the work you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So Deepgram is a voice AI platform company that powers businesses in the applications that they build around voice. So if you want to voice enable a text box on your website, you can use Deepgram. If you want a full voice agent in order to take orders at a quick serve restaurant, you can use Deepgram. If you want to do analytics on a 10,000 seat call center, you can use Deepgram. And my background is I was a particle physicist before I started Deepgram. Actually, I'd never worked at a tech company before. It's kind of funny. People ask me about how we pattern Deepgram or the culture or whatever, and I'm like, I don't know. I've never worked at another tech company. It's patterned more after academia, but with like the volume turned up to 11 on the speed, so speed of iteration. And so I was in dark matter particle physicist. I built deep underground dark matter detectors basically in like a James Bond lair, with cranes and yellow railing and guys grinding and, like that was the atmosphere, but 2 miles underground. And I actually did that both in China and in the US. In the US, we were only 1 mile underground, but nevertheless, what you're doing is running away from radioactivity beneath the surface. But, we learned a lot of things doing that type of work. And now we, have learned a lot of things about bringing AI to the world and just helping in the intelligence revolution, but from the voice angle. That's what Deepgram does.
Yeah, it's really cool. So my understanding is some of the work that you were doing back then, I guess is still considered sort of academic work, but had to do with like the like sound waves and the audio waves that you were picking up that sparked something that says, maybe there's something more that we could do with this besides look for dark matter.
Yeah, absolutely. We were using machine learning and deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning, in order to understand particle physics signals. And those signals were waveforms. They looked you could play them as audio if you wanted. They would sound weird. They'd be like whoop, beep, beep, things like that. But it was just a waveform, and the signal processing and machine learning that we built on top of that got us thinking about other applications. And actually the thing that really that made the light bulb go off is we thought, man, it's so interesting and weird what we get to do. We're like in this, this layer underground. Who gets to do this? Would it be cool if we had a backup copy of like what is going on? Like the conversations we're having, we're talking about building this detector. We're talking about the hydroelectric dam turning on in a few months, like all these weird moments in time. And could you just make a backup copy of it? So we built a little device to record audio all day, every day, literally 24/7. And it accrued a whole bunch of audio in the environment that we were in. And a few months later, after accruing hundreds of hours, maybe over 1,000 hours, we started thinking, wait a minute, what are we going to do with this data? Are we going to just listen to our lives back again? Like that would be extremely boring. But we also knew that through machine learning and signal processing, you'll be able to find interesting moments and then just discard the rest. And we were kind of pessimistic scientists at the time, though, where we were thinking not we are going to build it. We're just like, well, surely that's possible. So there must be a product out there in the world already that does that. And so we went looking for one, and this is 2015, 2016, and it definitely did not exist then. And still with the pessimistic scientist mindset where you think, no, somebody else will do it. We thought, okay, fine, it doesn't exist yet, but surely the cutting edge research labs like Google, like Microsoft, et cetera, must be working on it. And so we contacted them and said, hey, can we get access to your next gen system, that uses end-to-end deep learning in order to understand audio? And they were like, what are you talking about? Like audio and language are far too complicated. End-to-end deep learning is never going to be able to understand it. That's cute, kids, like a little pat on the head, basically. Like, that's great. And we're like, what? These people have no idea what is about to hit them. And so that's when we switched from pessimistic scientist mindset to like optimistic entrepreneur mindset. Is like, okay, the people that should know in this world don't know. They don't get it. So, and we're somehow the ones who now know. And by the way, we also have the skills to do it. Why don't we start a company around this? And that was Deepgram. We started in 2015 now. So it's been almost 10 years. And then we spent about 4 or 5 years of research. Just like we had a product that was released, but it was free and anybody could use it. And we didn't really promote it all that much. We just had maybe a few dozen like power users, and they just kept giving us feedback. And a few years after we released the free product, we started charging them, and they're like, I can't believe you let us use it for free this long, because it was so great. So we could have monetized earlier, but nevertheless, we raised a few $1 million, and it was just like 8 people working on taking this science idea that you could use end-to-end deep learning in audio, and then making it real and turning it into an actual product. And then we released that product about 5-6 years ago. And then now we're in high growth mode. We continue to do our frontier research, and that powers the next generation of models from Deepgram. But then we also have, the product arm of Deepgram that delivers these frontier models in a scalable, like runtime that gives the full engineering of, real-time audio being deployed in the cloud, in your VPC, on-prem, whatever. And then you can utilize this to power your enterprise and B2B voice applications. And so, now we're in that position as a company.
Yeah, it's amazing. I feel like, I don't know if you guys ever talked to IBM back in the day, but that was my exposure to a lot of what you just took me through in terms of a couple things. One is that's around when before it was even called IBM Watson, there was, Deep QA and some of these technologies. Some of it might have been through a partnership with Nuance Communications, right? And then, but some of the very first sort of Watson, what they used to call cognitive services, the first APIs were text to speech and speech to text. And, like a lot of things, IBM wasn't always great. They were great at coming up with, inventions and patents, but not always great at commercializing some of those. So, but I also think about some of the industry specific applications, like being able to detect through those audio files, like anomalies if you were doing petroleum, like drilling, right? And you need to know if like you hit sand, right? And to stop the drill immediately. But it was always this decision like, well, if I stop the drill, it's going to cost X. But if I don't stop the drill, it's going to cost 10X, right? So I got to be sure, and I've got to pick up like literally that audio signal that says something's in the line, something got through the filter, and we might have a problem. And then of course, being at IBM Research, there was a particle accelerator in the basement. So I don't know if it was a mile down or 2 miles down, but it was definitely somewhere that I did not have access to. But yeah, just a lot of really interesting work going on. And obviously, you came and discovered this viable, business from a completely different, pathway. But yeah, it's interesting to see like some of this really innovative work going back to the last round of AI that some of us are familiar with.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of development over the last, 7 decades basically in this area. And we're lucky to be coming around at the right time and kind of putting it all together. But there is something about the like the physicist mindset in AI. Actually, there are a lot of physicists like Dario, CEO of Anthropic, physicists, et cetera. A lot of physics people in AI. And I think a lot of the reason here is that you have to match up the real world with the underlying theory, and you do this through first principles and scaling laws and that type of thing. And this is what physicists are brought up and trained to do. And so it works out pretty well in this phase of the intelligence revolution right now, where we're still like in the science phase, of discovering what's possible and then scaling it up. Yeah, but we have a lot of respect for the folks. I actually have some books that are pretty amazing that are like by the IBM crew. They started doing this like basically in the 80s and doing patents, writing papers, writing books, et cetera, about how to do tasks like speaker diarization, which is how to tell who is speaking when. That's it. It'll be like an encyclopedia, like just on that one task. And so much research and effort went into doing that, translation, speech to text, all of that. What ended up making it all work at scale was flipping the equation around a little bit differently and saying, hey, the people building the models don't have to be the smart ones. They don't have to come up with every single rule for how to do diarization, speech to text, et cetera. What you need to do, the smart way, the smart thing to do is to set up the system in a data-driven way so that you match up inputs and outputs. Like, this is the audio in, this is the words out. I don't know what the rules are supposed to be in order to match those, but I'm going to create a system that back propagates the error through it and then updates the weights in this model. And this is what deep learning does. And then that's the mode of operation. So instead of like writing really clever rules to do it correctly, you just forego that. You say, that's not how we're going to do it. We're going to find great training data at scale, and then we're going to put enough expressiveness into the model for it to learn by itself, and then turn the crank. And this is the thing that actually ended up working for all sorts of areas, for images, for text, for audio, for video, et cetera.
Yeah, that's really cool. So obviously, things have advanced, quite a bit since then in terms of perhaps the consumption models, use cases, and then of course you've got to balance improved accuracy with, speed and other factors. Like, how do you guys think about that? You have different folks focused on those different, elements. How do you sort of make sure everyone's moving forward?
Yeah, it's a tough balance because accuracy is the first thing that people think about. How accurate is the model? How accurate is the model? And our models are the most accurate in the world. But an accurate model gets you a really nice demo, and that's it. Unless it can work in a really low latency mode with a really high throughput, reliably, in all sorts of venues as well. Like I mentioned, like the Deepgram cloud, or your own cloud, your own VPC. Like if you're an AWS or GCP or Azure customer, like having it running in your cloud, or if you have your own data center and you want it running there. So. And that's just for the general models. And then in many cases, you want the model to be adapted to the use case. So for instance, one of our customers is Jack in the Box, where you can drive up and get, and order food, but you're immediately talking to a voice agent and the experience is really great. But in order to get that perception side of that system working really well, you have to battle the car engine running, trucks passing in the background, kids screaming in the back, all sorts of things. It's a very challenging acoustic environment. And for that type of thing, you would want to adapt a model to that use case. And so there's really two parts to making a great product here. Is you have to have a great model, but you have to have a great engineering runtime. You have to have a great ability to run that model and adapt that model to the use cases.
One of the things I was thinking about is, I imagine for a company like Jack in the Box or anyone doing drive-through quick order, like, you don't even need to tell the customer that they're talking to an AI, right? I mean, do they even bother saying that?
You could put a sign there. This is typically what they do, but it's a really nice experience to just drive up and then instantly somebody talks to you, rather than waiting 20 seconds, a minute, whatever. And especially somebody who speaks like a different language, they roll up and start speaking in a different language. Now it's like, oh, what do we do? Find the person who can speak it, give me a couple minutes, they're making something, whatever it is, right? And instead, the voice agent can just flip to that language and just start speaking. You're talking about, fairly superhuman use cases now. They're always on. They're always waiting. You can infinitely scale up voice agents. They will know more language. Like they're some of the most skilled linguists and, folks who know a lot of languages in the world. They might know like 7, maybe 10 languages, something like that. These systems are going to know 100 very soon, and then it's just going to be a really great experience. So I think what the angle that most companies are taking is they notify you. They say like, hey, you're talking to an automated system when you first call, or like if you're calling a call center, if you drive up, they'll have a sign, that type of thing. But I think most users.
Hey everybody, Tim Sackett, host of HR Famous, a new podcast on the Work Defined Network. Am I famous? No, I'm HR famous. My wife says I'm a micro celebrity and 13 HR ladies around the world want their picture with me, which I think is funny. So, hey, what do we talk about on the pod? We talk about all the dumb stuff we do in HR in any given day, week, month, and we have fun with it, and we have some great guests. Come check us out. We're not famous. We're HR famous.
If they haven't interacted with the system yet, they probably will have an average negative sentiment. They'll be like, oh, this is not going to work very well. But then when they try it, then they're like, whoa, this is working pretty well. So that you instantly win them over and flip to into a new paradigm with them. They're like, oh, this works. This is great. That was really good. Why can't all systems work that way? And I'll tell you, lots of people are working on making that happen right now. It's there are a lot of factors that go into rolling out this technology. I can tell you that the underlying technology works, but then it has to now go be deployed into all of these different environments and then, checked and everything for veracity, et cetera. But it's being deployed very rapidly.
One of the reasons I wanted to bring that up in terms of just the transparency of notifying it. I mean, in the drive-through, I don't care. Like you said, just give me exactly what I ordered. And so accuracy is key. I guess speed is a factor too, of course. But I think I spent a lot of time in the talent space, specifically in talent acquisition. And as you probably know, there's a lot of companies that are not only doing like a conversational, transcription, which could be used for any conversation, just like we're recording here, but like recording interviews or using AI to screen, applicants and things like that. There's a lot more legislation and rules around being able to disclose that. And there's a lot of back and forth debate right now over, whether it's okay for companies to use an AI to interview a candidate instead of using a human being. And without going too deep into that use case, because there's reasonable arguments on both sides to a degree, but from a candidate perspective, when you have hundreds of applicants, a lot of times candidates they're not going to hear anything back unless you enable the scalability of your recruiting team to say, well, I just need to have a 20-minute phone call to ask a couple questions. What we may never, this isn't about building a relationship necessarily. It's just about giving somebody an opportunity to go past their paper, resume, which is probably written by AI, anyway, but how do I see more about this person to get a feel for whether I should actually move them towards, hiring manager, engagement or whatever. So I guess I'm just curious to get your perspective about that use case. And I know you can't always disclose, who your customers are, but I would be curious to know if you have any customers in that space.
Yes, we do have customers in that space, and it's a totally new capability now to be able to have a one-to-one conversation with anybody who applies. It's kind of, I think of this a lot. Like there are other contexts too that are similar. For instance, websites now, it's very common for folks to say your website is your storefront, But when people walk into your store, they're not greeted by anybody, at least now. It's like you can just look around at like a sterile storefront and hopefully you get everything you need. But if you don't, then there's nobody to talk to like help you out, basically, right? In websites, that's going to change drastically, where you'll have you'll be able to talk or chat or whatever to like, I'm really here to discover this. Can you just help me find it? And it takes you there. I think a very similar thing is, I already see it happening, but it's just going to become normal to talk to a company when you're applying. Sure, upload your resume, do that. But I think it's going to be very normal to have an AI to human conversation as your first cut, as your first pass, basically, right? Where you have a chance to like, here's my condensed version of myself, my resume, right? And then here's my like real time, what you're going to get, version of myself. And let's have that 20-minute or who cares, hour-long conversation, right? It doesn't matter, right? Like it's up to the person who's calling to if they want to talk that long or not, right? And yeah, that's an interesting thing, because actually, again, in like with call centers, you'd say this call may be recorded or monitored, that type of thing. You'll do the same thing in that situation. The conversation is happening, right? The transcription is happening. The bot is going through. You're recording everything, etc. When you do all of that, now you're going to have an artifact which is loaded into your recruiting pipeline, basically, where other folks can go read the summary, read the full transcript. They could watch the interaction, back in 2x speed. I know this sounds weird and creepy and whatnot, but like, actually, I think most people applying for a job would think, oh my God, this is so much better than somebody just looking at my resume and saying like, nah, it's a much better experience. It gives you a much better, take on the person. But that's the only scalable way to do it. Otherwise, the resume and yes or no option is like the only thing, because if you put a job ad up now, you'll get hundreds of applicants, and you just don't have time to review everything in that way. But you can have a voice agent talk to everybody and then, summarize it and get it down, and then go look at now the top 50 people from that, rather than, try to do all 500 yourself. So I think it's actually going to be it's going to lift a lot of weight off people's shoulders, I think, because then you can express yourself in a much more free way, and folks will be like, I like this person, let's bring him in for another round, rather than, did my resume hit the right thing in the right order or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's what people need to, I think this will be the norm, because otherwise, we've continued to play this cat and mouse game, right? Customizing the resume to match the job description, but now everything looks the same. So I think candidates increasingly will have to realize that it's not, did a human look at it, and a human with empathy and, whatever, knows what to look for, maybe, atypical experience, but, someone maybe we should talk to, just somebody different to throw in the mix. It's not that versus talking to an AI. It's literally, your odds are you're probably not going to get any visibility at all. But part of it goes back also to just people's, hypotheses over, what is actually being assessed when they decide, to move you forward. Are there knockout questions? Are there keywords that were missed, and, what have you? So yeah, there's a lot going on there. And then like towards the latter part of the recruiting funnel, when you're doing actual interviews where you have an hour with the hiring manager or maybe a team of people, the issue there might be, if you're using this tool, maybe people aren't reading the whole, transcript. Like you said, sometimes you got to do this at 2x, 3x, speed. So then you're relying on the summary. And so people get into having concerns maybe that the summary, did it really summarize the way, a human did? I mean, you could kind of go down that rabbit hole, for a while.
I think what will be more common there, like the summaries will happen, I think. And that will be another way to slice it, and, possibly look across all your signals to find people that you think would work out great in your company. But I think actually what will be more common is you query your database of people who have talked to the company. and you, for instance, like Deepgram, we have frontier research team, and there are lots of programmers in the world now, programmers and researchers that have utilized, PyTorch to do something. Okay, PyTorch is an underlying, framework in order to build deep learning models, the most popular one. And if you just put like PyTorch on your resume, that doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me, did you develop PyTorch? Did you, are you a contributor to PyTorch? Have you published nothing about it, but you're an absolute expert? There's really no way to get that through in a resume. Like there really isn't. There's not enough tokens. There's not enough characters there to express it. And so yeah, what can you do? You can, in the conversation, you deep dive. This is what you do as a human, right? Okay, and then what? And then what? And now deeper, and now deeper, and now deeper, et cetera. And then it's like, if this person basically wrote PyTorch, like they're going to know everything, and you will be able to figure that out. And so then what will you do after all those conversations are collected? There will be lots of shallow conversations about PyTorch, and then there will be a few deep ones, right? But you don't necessarily say, like, show me all the deep conversations about it. You say, you don't build a filter ahead of time for that. What you do is you query your database now and say, like, all these people have expressed interest in working at Deepgram, for instance. I'm looking for somebody to build this, and they definitely need the ability to build this kind of thing in PyTorch or whatever, right? And then now it's like, ooh, I have some candidates for you, right? These folks expressed, excitement, interest, in effectiveness in being able to do that type of thing. Look at these 20 candidates, right? And that's just going to be so much better, for everybody, for both sides of the equation, to match folks up with working at the right company, with the right culture, with the right, problems to tackle.
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as, again, without going down another sort of talent, rabbit hole, I do spend a lot of time in the responsible AI, AI governance space. So we just got to be careful and make sure there's human, oversight, because even down selecting is a decision, right? You've chosen to include or exclude people, going forward. So
I agree, but you're doing that. You're doing that no matter what. Yeah. So it's like you have to choose, because saying, we only look at resumes and we only look at them with human eyes and we only look at whatever. Okay, that's a bias, and everything's a bias, So you have to choose like the best, the one that makes the most, like that. Sure, yes, is the fairest, but also makes the most sense for both parties. And yeah, no matter what, unfortunately, the communication bandwidth is compressed, and with compression means some things are lost. But we can surely do better than the current version of the system.
Agree.
So yeah,
absolutely. So I know, just in hearing a little bit about what the culture is like at Deepgram. I mean, I'm curious to get your perspective on whether it's like your academic background that influenced this, but you seem to be as advanced as your technology is, and you guys are always like pushing the envelope, which probably in itself is part of that background in terms of continuous like experimentation and things like that. But I have an appreciation for the fact that you're able to stay like human-centric and continue to appreciate the value of human intelligence, both individual and collective, human intelligence and cognitive diversity, as you sort of attack some of these very technical, problems. So you could just sort of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's pretty funny to think like we're a language company, Deepgram, and let's just look at some of the language. What is a company? How do we use the word company? Yes, there's the startup company, public company, that kind of company. But also it's like, hey, you're in good company. You're in good. What is company really? A company is a group of people, and like you can't like. I know technology companies, folks like to think it's all about the tech. It really isn't. It's about the people marshaling the tech, And so, and there's the marshaling of the tech today and, a year from now and 5 years from now and a decade from now. And so really what you're doing is you're setting up this like organism, and you're just like releasing it into the world, as this like automaton that's going out and doing its thing. And And so now, how do you want that to behave? Do you want that organism to be like a fully top down, everything is done this way, hub and spoke way to run the company and all the decisions run through me or not, or, that type of thing. And there are companies that work that way. But they have their pros and their cons, right? And Deepgram does not work that way. We're much more do the right thing at the right time. You don't have like a high transparency. You don't have to consult me about this or that or whatever. But we do have, an overarching mission in North Star, and that is to increase the productivity of the world. And the mission is to do it through audio now, serving B2B, using real-time AI, and supplying the underlying engineering and cutting-edge models to developers in order to build it, right? But now there's a lot of freedom in that saying, hey, you're given all this information, like every meeting in Deepgram that's not a one-on-one, every meeting that's not a one-on-one is recorded in Deepgram. So anybody can watch anything and see like, what is this team doing? What is that team doing? How are the decisions being made over here or there or whatever, right? So you're never like information limited. And there are pros and cons to this, and you have to be really selective in who you hire into the company. But one of the things that you look for, like one of the best signs, the top sign for sure, is curiosity. For Deepgram and this kind of company is curiosity. And one thing that doesn't come through very well on a resume, curiosity. It comes through really well in a conversation, curiosity. And so anyway, but you really have to think about that kind of thing because you want this self-propagating, like at least at Deepgram, you want this self-propagating like organism that goes out into the world but just adheres to a few of these constraints, like increase the productivity of the world, do it through audio and et cetera. And I think setting it up that way is a much more, academic way of thinking about things. It's just like the best ideas win, and those ideas can come from anyone. And, my door is always open. Anybody's door is always open. It's not just about me, So if you're seeing something, like that's going wrong or whatever, like pull the cord, stop the bus, right? And like let's talk about why that's happening, or how we can fix it, or like maybe you can't fix it and like we have to come back to that later or whatever it is, but like everybody then will be informed about it. And there's something about that makes like Deepgram is around 100 people, and in this like 100, 200, 300 person range, like you can still be very agile as a company. And we aim to keep it that way for a long time. And one of the ways that we'll be doing it is through automation and AI in the company. But again, this turns into a company, people, marshaling the technical resources in order to go out and achieve the goal of the company. So yeah, I think the most succinct way I can articulate what it is Deepgram is an intelligence company. We're a learning company. We're a teaching company. We're that kind of thing. So internally, if you're moving through your career, if you're not learning, we're doing something extremely wrong. And what will keep you at the company for a long time, happy as a curious person, a curious, motivated person, is learning over time. Same thing with our customers, teaching them and them teaching us, et cetera. And then, of course, we sell like intelligence and learning products, So I think when you connect it all together that way, it just becomes like obvious. It's like, oh, like this is the way to build an intelligence company. And so I don't think myself or, the founding team at Deepgram really sat down and like architected it out, that this is the way that it should go. But we just came to this as like, this is the only way it's going to work, long term.
Yeah, no, that's great that you've got everybody sort of bought into that, because I completely agree with the approach. And I agree, we've got to really, how do you harness all that intelligence, whether, you can put whatever, sort of prefix on that intelligence you want, but, there still is a place very much for human intelligence and curiosity amongst all this technology. And I just think you're in an unbelievable place because everything seems to be moving towards voice and voice interaction. I mean, my daughter doesn't even use her fingers to text anymore. She just records these I feel like she's recording voice memos, but all she's doing is sending text back and forth. And so just even these everyday things. I mean, I guess some of us got used to it with our intelligent, home assistants, right? I've got a Google, I've got a couple Alexas and Siri, and Yeah, sometimes it's funny because my wife sometimes will just call the wrong one. Like we're listening to music, like Siri, play something. It's like, no, that's not Siri. She's not going to answer.
From our perspective, like this is one of the first principles things as a company, like, like why we would even work on audio is we just saw like, what do humans do all day? If you're talking, if I don't even want to, I'm biasing it by saying the word talking, but like if you're somehow communicating with one of your best friends or, coworkers or whatever, and they're in the same room and they're next to you and there's no other distraction going on and there's no other like constraint. What is the thing that most people do? And let's look at it across the ages, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years, etc. Actually, this idea that like you're going to text the same person in the room to talk about X or Y, etc., as like the most
Hey, this is Brent Skinner, host of Small Talk Window here at the Work Defined Podcasting Network. Have you ever wanted a short podcast to listen to during a coffee break of your workday? You've come to the right place. My guests dispense with the small talk as quickly as possible and settle into a meaningful conversation around the world of work.
like the best option, for communicating with them is just like a short blip on like the human time scale. And it's the blip when voice AI wasn't working very well, basically, right? So like over the past like 30, 40 years, something like that. Before that, you had no texting ability to the human. So what would you do? You would go talk to them, right? Or write a letter. But even then, you would much prefer to just talk to them, right? So now in the last like decade or two, a lot of folks got used to texting on the phone, writing things on the laptop, et cetera. And that became in a lot of ways like the preferred mode of communication. Sometimes folks will Slack a person that's sitting right next to them, et cetera, But this is partially because they're so used to it. It's a lot of times it's because there's other constraints. Like there's other people in the room, you don't want to bother other people, so you'll just Slack the person next to you. That makes sense. But, the natural form that we all communicate in is through spoken language, And so when we were, 10 years ago starting Deepgram, we were looking around saying like, what is going on? Like there's images being figured out in deep learning. There's text like Google search and everything. Oh, there's all these products built around text. And, one of the first things to ever be digitized in the world was voice or like technologically boosted. It's the telephone. It's all these things, and it's like, what happened here, And it's like really that there's a technology limiting factor. It's not working in real time. It's frustrating to people, that type of thing. It's like, what if you just solve that? I mean, it feels like the technology is here, the data is here, and certainly, this is us talking 10 years ago. Certainly in the next 30 years, this is going to be solved. Like there's no doubt, right? And then we will go back to having one of our main means of communication will be voice. And I say one of because I don't think it's going to be the only. I think it makes sense to text. I think it makes sense to take pictures and send video. And I think it makes sense to talk. So you're typing, tapping, and talking, on your devices and whatnot. But talking is going from like near 0% to like a third or whatever of all of the communication that you're going to do. So it's going to experience the most growth out of all these individual areas because the individual areas had already been tapped into typing and tapping over the last like 2 decades, basically, or 3 decades, really. But so, yeah, so to us, it was just so obvious from first principles, like, okay, this is going to happen. Surely in the next few decades, it's going to happen. And we're physicists, we know how to grind. We were coming straight out of academia. So like you're getting paid almost nothing and you're working for years or decades at a time with almost no results, et cetera. Like you're tuned for this, right? So we just bet on that. We bet on voice and end-to-end, data-driven deep learning coming together at some point in the future. I don't know if it's going to be 2 years from now or 30 years from now. And this is 10 years ago, right? We had an idea it'd probably be about 7 years. I was off by a few years. It's about 8, 9, 10 years is when it really came into its own.
Well, I definitely need to start changing my habits and get used to using my voice because apparently my typing is getting worse as I'm getting older. So I'm probably better off just speaking it. I just gotta, it's a habit. You just gotta start.
I notice I've always been one of those people that's like hated the soft keyboards on phones. I wanted like the tactile keyboards. But but I dealt with it for years and, got pretty good at typing with the soft keyboard. But now I mentally can't be bothered. I'm like, this thing should just know what I want to do, or I should be able to talk to it and have it correct it or whatever. And so instead, it's like it's all just being built right now, and I'm very excited about that. I'm like, all right, we'll get to ditch this capability gap, and we'll move at the speed of thought in the future. So I'm gonna be pretty pumped about that when it's actually like widespread.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, even just beyond, frankly, I don't even. My phone is more like a small computer than it is like a communication device. But I think about, like, I was just in a boot AI agent kind of boot camp, right? And the instructor's like doing all these systems instructions and longer prompts or whatever, and he's doing it through his dictation software on his computer, and seemed to be pretty working reasonably well. And like that was a those are a lot of words, right? So it's like a time savings thing as well. So yeah, I just think, like you said, more going forward, I think it's just going to be even more, natural and in more, situations.
Yeah, if you ever trained an employee too, you recognize like, yes, there's a lot of written material, but probably per character or per word or whatever, there's a lot more words spoken in order to teach them, and but I look at that a lot, similar to like how you set up an agent now. You might prompt it with the employee handbook, with the job description, with all these things. These are all written, okay? But then that gets you a certain percentage to like understanding of what the job actually is, right? Well, there's a whole other set of things that need to happen through knowledge transfer from other folks in the company, through like talking about, like, a lot of times job description and employee handbooks are like much more distilled, and you need to talk about the specifics of like what the role actually is. Okay, how do you expand on that? Well, it's through just real-time conversation with your coworkers and your manager, et cetera. And yeah, I think it's going to be much more normal to have all of those ingested and considered in bringing people up to speed. And so like ramp time will go down for new people joining companies. The effectiveness of what they want to do and like how they are able to marshal resources and achieve it like is going to go up. And I think there's some other predictions here. Like, I think there will be a lot more product managers in technology companies now relative to engineers, and or people with that kind of mindset, like a product manager mindset, because you're less. It's not that you have no constraint on engineering resources. You absolutely do, but you have fewer now constraints on them, and so the ratios are going to change, et cetera. And so the mindset is going to change too. And a way that I like to think about this is everyone's a manager now, actually. And this is a big mind shift switch, where lots of companies, like now in pre-intelligence companies, meaning pretty much every company existing today still, it is normal to have like a, I don't know, 9-to-1 or maybe 6-to-1 IC to manager ratio or something like that. And so you have 5 times as many or whatever, 6 times as many ICs as you do managers. But so that means most of the people in your company don't have to think like a manager, But I think that's going to be one of the biggest shifts, is like actually everybody in your company is going to have to think like a manager, but they're going to be managing, agent resources, and, they'll have to be thinking on a different plane now, rather than just specifically this task that needs to be done. How precisely is it going to get done? That's not necessarily the goal now. The goal is to marshal the resources to get it done. And that may be you doing it, or that may not be, and that's going to be a big change. But communication is going to be key in making all of that happen, and a lot of it's going to be spoken.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's interesting, because I know people have talked about, what is the future of middle management, and whose role is it to be sort of like that bot manager, or you're managing, digital labor. Do we need fewer of those people? Like that ratio, whatever it is, 6-to-1, 9-to-1, 20-to-1, you may not need. I guess it depends on how many agents you've got, but it's definitely not. This isn't like managing a bunch of Python scripts, right?
Well, it might be 6-to-1, humans to AI agents, and then now you just multiply the capability of your company by 6.
Yeah. Do you see any differences in terms of adoption or usage patterns or use cases like in the US market versus other markets, just culturally, the way they interact with technology? I'm sure you have companies way beyond the US.
Yeah. There's Europe, there's US, and then there's Asia. These are pretty much the if you want to split it into 2 categories, I would currently probably say like Asia and the West, but the West is very split between the US and Europe. So I would split it into 3. But in Europe, at least, still, I think the sentiment is changing here a little bit as of late, but the traditional sentiment here is like put the brakes on everything, and I think this is a very dangerous way to think. There's a cost, an opportunity cost to doing that. In the rest of the world, basically it's a standoff kind of situation, and if you don't do anything but other people are willing to do it, then you're left behind. And that is probably the largest driving factor in like why countries or regions of the world should invest in AI right now. It is similar to an arms race. It's just true. This is the intelligence revolution, just like the industrial revolution, and the figuring it out early and maintaining a lead is going to have a drastic effect on a global scale for decades to come. And the US is actually kind of in the middle. Yes, we're the leaders in like first producing this technology and first gathering data and figuring out how to do this type of thing, et cetera. But Asia is now doing really well on the engineering side and the data collection side, and maybe not as the best terminology there, but nevertheless they're doing way more of it. And so there's a like reflection that the US needs to do versus China, basically saying, us internally, how much are we going to be like Europe? How much are we going to be like China? And from a world power, economic power, marshaling resources perspective, you got to be more like China. I'm not saying the US wants to become China, but you have to think a little bit more like, this isn't going against American principles either. Like the general idea behind the United States is that there aren't laws telling you what you can do. There are laws telling you what you can't do. Okay. And this is a big switch, compared to a few hundred years ago in the world. And we need to tap into that, in the US right now and say like, hang on a second. Right now, most American citizens are okay with, or at least implicitly okay with, utilizing a service, having that service be better because their data was utilized in it. Okay. And so this is Google, this is many social media, applications that folks use. I think if you were to take away like all of the personalization and everything, people would say like, I really don't like using this service anymore because it's not personalized for me. And that's part of the give and take. That's part of the currency. It's a little like paying your taxes or something like that. You want to be part of, the capitalist society that is the US, well, you have to pay your taxes, Okay. Well, if you want to be part of the technological and intelligence revolution, in order to be part of that society, you also have to contribute in some way in order to like better it. Now, I don't think that means that it's just, the Wild West, do whatever you want. I think we can have morals, we can have ethics, we can do this the right way. We don't have to be creepy about it. We just have to be straightforward. And so yeah, I do see some big differences. I do warn, when I'm in Washington talking with folks, like China, I spent time in China as well. Like I mentioned with the physics experiment, I was there across 4 years and saw the development. They know how to build, and when you give them a blueprint for something, they will follow it, and they will follow it better than us. And we need to change that. We used to be amazing at this, but ever since essentially the 80s, if you look at the ratio of R&D spend in the US compared to GDP, it was going up until the 80s, and now it's going down. And it's been consistently going down over that time. What I call this is resting on our laurels. That is all we're doing. We're taking profits and we're resting on our laurels. That is not a good idea. We need to invest in basic research. We need to invest in the companies. We need to, take a beat and allow our private companies and public companies to figure out the economics behind the AI revolution that's happening, and then figure out what to do about it later. I don't mean 3 decades later. I mean, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, like get a good grasp on it. And then we can start talking about what kind of regulation needs to happen.
God, this has been fantastic. Such an interesting conversation. You're doing amazing work. So keep going, keep experimenting, pushing the envelope. Love it. Thank you so much for spending time with me and my audience. I think there's a lot of insights from this conversation. So thank you again for coming.
Well, it's been great chatting with you. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.